Thank you for having me and welcome everybody. This is an interesting subject, and I think it's probably timely because we are once again on the edge of going into another war cycle. So in order to understand where we are, we have to understand where we've been. If you go from the 2 million years where we crawled out of Africa and in family units walked all over the world, and then you go to the 10,000 year period when city-states originated, to the year 1800. By the year 1800, we had 1 billion people. In the 100 years from the year 1800 to the year 1900, profound changes in the planet took place. The population of the planet doubled from 1 billion to 2 billion. Then you had industrialization, and with industrialization came industrialized war as well as industrialized killing. By 1900, about all of the whales and buffaloes, almost all of them had become extinct. But for the efforts of a small handful of people, the buffalo would have become extinct, and then whaling commissions took place, which limited whaling. So we were successful in that environmental battle in saving the whales and saving the buffalo. But we were not successful in being able to transition from small city-states and language groups to thinking globally and acting locally. From 1900 to 1970, the population of the planet doubled again to 4 billion. And by the time we got to 4 billion people, we started to have major problems with not only the environment, but major problems in terms of how we were now able to destroy all of humanity. Because once we invented atomic weapons and we went from fission weapons to fusion weapons, humanity stood at the edge of complete destruction, and the threats to humanity were such that our very existence was in question. Now, I have friends from the former Soviet Union that I play tennis with, and as well as I have dinner with on occasion. So the planet's become much, much smaller. But our thinking needs to be to transition to globally. And we're now in a period from 1970 to 2015 where the population of the planet has gone from 4 billion to 7.4 billion, and we're adding 80 to 100 million people a year to a planet that's already bursting at the seams with people. So with industrialized fishing from 1970 to today, half of the fish in the ocean are now gone. What I propose in this book, in working with other organizations globally as well as locally, is that we create a global high seas marine preserve to close off international waters to commercial fishing. What would be closed off to commercial fishing is about 1% of the fishermen in the world, because 1% of the fishermen are responsible for about 70% of the catch, and they are just decimating the oceans. The way this happened is the same way that it happened with buffalo. When people were killing buffalo with bows and arrows and single-shot muskets, you weren't going to have the mass extinction of buffalo. When people were whaling on small whaling vessels close to shore, they weren't going to be taking enough whales. It was going to be the threat of existence of all whales. But as technology improved, the ability of the buffalo to survive those changes in technology decreased. And once you had railroads and repeating rifles, at that point, it was literally almost all over. A small handful of people, like you, got involved, and that small handful of people is what made the difference that saved the buffalo from extinction And had it not been for concerned individuals with whaling commissions, we wouldn't have whales. They would have just been completely killed off. Now, I don't worry too much about little criminal organizations that go and shoot girls in the face and blow up schools and shoot up restaurants and do the things that are current news today. Because when I was in the anti-nuclear movement, I was concerned that we were going to blow up the world. It was a different threat and a different time period. But I did not for the life of me think that we would be killing off all of the fish in the oceans. I didn't think that was possible. Yet it has not only become possible, it is a reality. The question is, what are we going to do about it? What I propose in this book is that we slowly decrease defense spending and increase spending for space and ocean exploration, but use the same defense contractors and the same congressional districts to do it. I don't think it's prudent in this century to use war as economic policy. I think it's not only a failed policy, but it's a prescription for certain disaster. And that is exactly where we're headed. If you listen to the rhetoric of politicians on the right, they now want to have a war with Iran, not having learned the lessons of having an illegal war with Iraq. And it's like we need to learn from this, and the reason we need to learn from this is because we all have a vested interest in the future, in young people. And I think that in making this transition from a defense spending economy to an economy based on space and ocean exploration, as well as an economy that incorporates the needs of the environment, a sustainability economy versus a consumerism economy, I think we'll be just fine. I'm not a gloom and doomer at all. I don't think there's any reason why we can't have a strong technological base in a modern society and at the same time have chimpanzees and mountain gorillas and snow leopards and dolphins and the incredible life that exists only on this planet. And in being optimistic and in being concerned about the future, which is why I wrote this book, I think that not only can we close off the high seas to commercial fishing, but we can not only save the fish stocks, but we can make it so that there's more fish. If you close off international waters to commercial fishing, what will happen then is the fish stocks will get a chance to increase their numbers. It's like increasing the bank account. This is a project, an environmental challenge, where there's not any losers. The fishermen win because they don't lose their livelihood. All nations win because humanity depends greatly on the oceans for protein. And of course, the fish win. A resource like fishing or like logging does not mean that you kill off every fish or you cut down every tree. You can carefully harvest them and you can control it so that it does work properly. Individual nations have done and are doing a good job in protecting their fisheries. 40% of the fish in the United States comes from Alaska, and it is very heavily regulated, very carefully regulated, but it's within the 200-mile limit that the United States controls. Where you get problems is once the fish, who don't recognize the national boundaries, follow the currents and get out into the high seas, you have what's called the tragedy of the commons. Since the fish don't belong to any one nation, everybody can fish them, and the goal is to catch them before they're all gone, so consequently the fish stocks are collapsing. We don't need to do this. It's like with shark fin soup. We can't stop shark finning. There's over 100 million sharks a year that are just killed, and if you kill the top predator in the food chain, you destroy the entire food chain. We can stop shark finning, and the reason we can do it in the United States is between the United States, Canada, and Mexico, it's the largest economic bloc on the planet. It's a $20 trillion economic bloc, and we can put economic pressure on the nations that are going to engage in this brutally horrific and environmentally disastrous activity. If we stop these nations from killing sharks, you will have healthier fish stocks all the way around. It's the same with ahi tuna. That is a battle that we have to take right here in the United States. We have to tell the restaurants, we have to tell the cities, you cannot sell ahi tuna because it is not only endangered, it is going to become extinct. And if the United States leads the way through example, and the example has to be from the grassroots up, other nations will follow. We can put pressure on these other nations, and people say, well, what about the Japanese that depend so heavily on fishing and on ahi tuna and all the rest? If you do a boycott of any of these nations for even one day, they lose more money than the entire fishing industry itself. The fishing industry is not a large industry. Without government subsidies, it actually wouldn't be able to survive. So I think these are environmental battles we can win. On redirecting defense spending towards space and ocean exploration, yes, that's going to be difficult. It's difficult because there's vested interest in the current process. The military-industrial complex is powerful, but they're not that powerful. They're not as powerful as you, the consumer. But you can't create unemployment in all of these communities that depend on defense spending for their livelihood. This is why you have to give them alternatives. And space exploration for the aerospace contractors is a perfect alternative, and preservation of the wildlife in the oceans, as well as research into what's under the oceans for the Navy contractors, is a perfect alternative for them. The only thing that's going to be accomplished in having another war, as is currently being planned by various people who have a vested interest in pushing the war agenda, is you're going to have untold difficulties, not only for this generation, but for all future generations, and you're going to make an already fragile legal international system fall apart. This doesn't have to happen. This time we can take preventative measures by offering realistic economic and political alternatives to the defense spending model. These are battles that we can win. If you look at this graph that Aaron Crabtree put together for us, you can see that as you cut defense spending and increase the spending for space and ocean exploration, in just a few years, brand new industries will be created from having the necessity of having launch vehicles that are faster to get to the inner solar system, as well as having ships that can go deeper and explore the ocean floor. New industries is what this country needs, and new industries is what will vitalize this economy and create millions of jobs for our young people in this century. Thank you. Any questions?